to perfect your herd in years to come. You go out there and look over the crop of lambs, and you say, oh, look at that one. His back is straight. His wool is thick and oily. Look at the way he holds his head. Look at the depth of his chest. Yes, sir. There is the sire of my flocks for years to come. And God has the appalling nerve to say, could I have that one, please? God, who do you think you are? God or something? No, God, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I've got this one over here with 3 legs. I'll never get anything out of him down at the market. But just to show you how much I love you, here's my best 3-legged lamb. Aren't you pleased, God? And Isaiah says that somewhere back in the background of heaven is the quiet sound of God vomiting. These people are near me with their lips and far from me with their hearts. Hear God. I understand something of the cost of sin. Sin is not merely a little matter of a slip-up here. And remember, this is unintentional sin. I didn't mean to offend God, but just in my humanity, I know that I have done things which fall short of the moral perfection of God, and I realize that's a horribly expensive business. Here's the most expensive thing I have to offer, the most valuable thing I have to offer. Now, how do I present this to the Lord? I am the offerer, and I lay my hands on that sheep's head. Have you sinned? No. I am the sinner. And you're dying because of what I've done. And then you take the knife, not the priest. You take the knife and slit that lamb's throat. How serious is sin? It is a matter of life and death. The soul that sins shall die. Now again, I want to emphasize here, this is not this arbitrary tyrant who says, you do that to me and I'm going to kill you. No. I guarantee you, the soul that unbends a paperclip into a U and sticks it into the electrical outlet will die. Or if not, you'll have a very electrifying experience. Why? Because the electricity suddenly decides to kill you? Because the electricity suddenly decides, I don't like people that do that to me. It's the nature of electricity and the nature of human flesh that when you get them crossed, you get a very hot smell. Now again, God is attempting to teach people. If you live even unintentionally in ways that are not appropriate to my character, it'll kill you, child. But I don't want you to die, and I'll make a way so that you don't have to die, but somebody will have to die. You hear what I'm saying in the background, don't you? This all points to Christ. This all points to Christ. It's as though I jump out of a tall building. No, hey, I don't mean to offend God. I just want to fly a little bit. I mean, surely a good God wouldn't smash me on the sidewalk, would he? And I'm about halfway down and picking up speed, and I say, I think I'd like to rethink this. I don't have the option in the normal world, do I? But suppose suddenly I find myself standing up on the observation deck again. And here's God. And God says, "Welcome to life, son." And I say, "God, this is great. Thanks. I jumped off of there and nothing happened to me." "God, what's that body doing down there on the sidewalk?" "That's my son." "You mean when I jumped off, somebody had to hit the bottom?" "That's the way the world is made, son. Cause and effect." "And for me to stand here alive was for him to die." "Yes, son." The Jews didn't kill Jesus. I did. You did. And we notice the blood. Now, there's nothing magic about blood. There was nothing magic about Jesus' blood chemistry. The point is, blood represents life. The life of this animal is in your place. The life of this animal is for your life. Sin is costly, terribly costly. We notice that the whole animal is burned. Total dedication, total surrender. You can't enter into this thing with your fingers crossed. I said there is accommodation to the ability of the offerer. And then one other thing that is not said here, but it's said elsewhere in the Scripture, this burnt offering was offered every morning and every evening in the temple. Every morning, every evening. How can sinful people live in the presence of the holy God? Only if God is constantly making provision for his righteous holiness to be reconciled. And I remind you of Paul's words in Corinthians. God was in Christ reconciling himself to the world. Isn't that interesting? Usually reconciliation takes two people. God, I want to be reconciled to you. And so here's what I'll do, and I'll work this, and you'll be reconciled to me. God reconciles himself. He makes the offering system available. And in the end, he made the offering available. And I bring you back to Abraham. You don't have to sacrifice your son to be reconciled to me, Abraham, because here's the provision, here's the ram that I have provided for myself on this mountain, the Temple Mountain in Jerusalem. Okay, that's the burnt offering. That's sort of the ground of everything else. Now then, we move on to the grain offering, or as I've labeled it here, the cereal offering. Assuming I can find the transparency that I have in mind. Oh, but there we are. Good. The grain offering is an offering of thanks. Let's get it down a little lower. There we are. An offering of thanks. This is not an atonement offering. This is saying, God, thank you for providing my daily needs. Remember that in the ancient world, they did not have meat for every meal. Animals were too valuable to kill, usually. You kept them for the milk. You kept them for the wool. You may have kept adult animals for the calves, and you may have eaten calf every once in a while. But by and large, the major food was grain. This wasn't because they were vegetarians. It's simply because they couldn't afford to eat meat. And so when I offer the grain to the Lord, and you notice in various forms, I am expressing my gratitude. You are the one who provided this for me, O Lord, and I thank you. I'm also expressing the dedication of my stewardship to God. This grain doesn't belong to me, Father. It belongs to you, and you have entrusted me with it. And here is a portion back again. I have always loved John Wesley's words on tithing. He says, we are Christians, not Jews. Therefore, we do not ask, what shall I do with the 90% of my money that belongs to me? No, as Christians, all of our money belongs to God. The only question is, how much of God's money am I going to spend on myself? All the grain is God's. How kind of Him that He only asks me to give Him 10% of His grain back again. All my money is God's. How much will I spend on myself? That tends to put a different perspective on things for me. In the grain offering, you may not use any leaven. Again, we're talking about object lesson here. Leaven is a symbol of sin because you put it in one part of the loaf of bread and bzzzt, it's in all the loaf of bread. It's a mold, and so is among the creepy crawlies that the Bible is rather concerned about. You can't use leaven in this offering. Again, my offering of my gifts back to God must be untainted. I'm not doing this to manipulate you. I'm not doing this to use you. I'm not doing this to make you feel good about me. I'm doing this in pure gratitude for your kindness to me. This is where I get very jumpy about sermons that tell people to tithe because if you do, God will bless you. I think that's putting leaven in the offering. You ought to tithe, and more than tithe, friends, because God has been so good to you. You owe Him everything, and He allows you and me to keep so much of it to use for ourselves. If God never blessed me again in my life, but still gave me the promise of Jesus, what does He owe me? Nothing, I think. Yes, fact is, if you are faithful to Him, you will discover Him blessing you in the ways He chooses, but that's not the reason to give. Don't put the leaven of gimme in your offerings. But He says you should include salt. Oh, wait a minute. No leaven, but put salt in. Well, I'm with God. I don't think food is worth eating without salt in it. Some of you are on salt-free diets and are feeling wonderful, so I say bless you. What's going on? In the ancient world, salt was the same value by weight as gold. So there's the value thing. But also, if you noticed in your reading, he says the salt of the covenant. There was a salt covenant. Two travelers meet on the road. They going to beat each other up? No. In fact, they enter into a covenant to protect one another. Each one reaches in to the other person's salt pouch and takes a pinch out and puts it in their own. My salt is your salt. And so again, this grain offering is symbolic of the amazing, amazing thought that the God of all eternity would enter into a covenant with me. And he would take a pinch of my salt and put it in his pouch, and he would say, "Here, son, take some of my salt. Put it in yours." We belong to each other. So this cereal offering is a symbol of dedication, stewardship, gratitude. All the grain I own, O Lord, is yours. I give you back this small portion to say thank you and to tell you that I know who I am. I'm your steward on the earth. It's not my grain, it's yours. Move on to the peace offering or the fellowship offering. Again, this is not a sin offering. It's a fellowship offering. It is a blood offering. You do bring animals if you're going to give them, and the blood is sprinkled on the altar. But still, it is a celebration of the fact that there is peace between us. It's a celebration of the fellowship that exists between God and us. Once again, you see, you're not getting it. You're celebrating the fact that God has done it. The sacrifices are not to manipulate a resistant God. They are to recognize what a loving, gracious God has made possible. Here, did you notice the fat is to be burned? Now, it's hard for us in our obese society to believe it. But in much of the world, fat is a great delicacy. Instant energy. You know, it was the Snickers bar of the ancient world. I remember going to Romania and being taken to a pastor's home. This was just 2 years after the revolution. And it was clear that the pastor's wife had bankrupted them to lay out a wonderful spread. And as the guest, she gave me what was obviously the best dish. And I looked at it, and I thought it was very beautifully arranged. And I thought, my, I've never seen pure white candy like that. So I took a cube and popped it in my mouth. It wasn't pure white candy, it was pure white fat. The most valuable thing she could give me. And here you burn the fat from the animal. This is God's portion. The best belongs to Him. The finest belongs to Him. And then some of the meat goes to the priest. And then we're told in chapter 7, which sort of gives an additional, some additional items about these offerings. We're told that the rest is eaten by the worshiper. in God's presence. So it is a fellowship meal with God as the host. If you're taking notes, in Deuteronomy 12 is a fascinating little injunction. Verses 17 to 19, we're told that you save up the fat. But there it is, fellowship. God making provision where we can live together in His presence, where we can enjoy Him and where He can enjoy us. Is it any accident that in the last day we will sit down to the wedding supper of the Lamb? Can you imagine what that's going to be like? Sometimes I think about it. I'm sure Jesus will have some jokes to tell about Peter. Did you all hear about the time? And Peter, he'll laugh. Say, oh, Lord, you're not going to tell that one, are you? But he'll know the Lord doesn't mean a thing malicious. What a day as God shares all the riches of eternity with us in a meal. Come, the table is prepared for you. Well, we need to rush on. We've got two more here yet. The sin offering is explicitly for ignorant sin. You don't know you have sinned, but you think you probably have. And the answer is yes, you have. And so God has made a provision so that even given the fact that I fall short of His best, I can still live in His presence. Even if there's a hole in my radiation suit, His atomic radiation will not kill me. I don't know there's a hole there, but there sure is. And God has made a provision to deal with that in advance. Once again, we notice here especially the prominence of blood. And then we notice that again, the fat is burned, but the rest of the animal is taken outside the camp and burned. What's the symbolism? Removing of sin from the presence of God. God cannot endure sin. And so the New Testament says Jesus suffered for sin outside the camp. And you have certainly the most terrible words in Scripture. My God, where are you? Where'd you go? Why have you left me? Oh, Jesus, as the second person of the Trinity, knew very well why the Father had left. The Father can't live in the presence of sin. But He's crying out as a person. You know, you can know things and still feel other things, can't you? God cannot live in the presence of sin. Oh, if the Christian church could recover that. Oh, well, it doesn't matter. You know, we all fall short a little bit. God will say, I forgive. You know, great grandpa in the sky who says, oh, that's all right, honey. No. We're dealing with the Holy One. And sin, known or unknown. And He cannot coexist. Oh, that God would give me, and maybe you, a hatred for anything that would break God's heart. Anything that would offend Him. Anything that would drive a wedge between us. Then there are certain sins where the line is kind of fuzzy. Is this intentional or not intentional? You heard somebody swear an oath and you were called to testify and you sort of fudged it. Well, you knew you were doing it, and yet it wasn't really what the Bible calls sin with a high hand. I know what's right and I'm going to do what's wrong and I don't care. It's not that, but still there's a certain degree of intentionality here. And so the guilt offering is for those kinds of things where it's not quite clear whether this is intentional or not. Now, I want to emphasize again, and we're doing very well on time. I want to emphasize again, there is forgiveness for intentional sin, but that's not what the sacrificial system is for. Those kinds of sins have to be dealt with on a case-by-case basis. No, the sacrificial system is for those who want to be in a relationship with God, who want to experience continual fellowship, who want to express their love and their gratitude and their awareness that the only way they can live in His presence is because of His constant atonement. That's what the sacrificial system is for. It's not so that I can live like hell and have God say that's all right. Not at all. Okay, well, we haven't talked about the priesthood, and there are a number of things we could say there. I'll touch on it next week when we turn to talk about the next section, but we've said the main things I thought we ought to talk about tonight. Do you have questions before we go? How much of it was clear to the Hebrews, who seem to be as remote from it as we are? Not much to most of them. And that's one of the interesting things. You know, it used to be said, well, where did all this marvelous stuff come from? It was because the Hebrews were religious geniuses. What do the Hebrews tell us? The Hebrews tell us we're religious numbskulls. God dragged us kicking and screaming into these understandings. So there were some who did, some who really deeply cared, and the ones who passed this on. But I suspect that many of the average people didn't have a clue. Yes? I think that's it. I think, you know, it's the same way you can ask, why did He choose bread and wine for communion? You know, why not Coke and cookies? Or I think the reason is because in that culture, bread and wine were the staples, the fundamental thing you need. So I think, for instance, blood sacrifice. Sin is costly. Sin is a matter of life and death. So that I think it is appropriate and works. And that's the reason why. Yeah, well, I think you're absolutely right. And the other sacrificial systems did tend to be magical, manipulative. You know, the God is out to get me. So we're going to pull a fast one on him. I'll put my hands on this sheep, and I'll say a ritual, and I become the sheep, and I step behind the curtain, and they kill the sheep, And the God says, it's all right, I got Oswalt. No, this is toning all that down. But it's using stuff that would be familiar to the Hebrew people, and it's infusing it with some new ideas and some new values along the way. And that's typically what God does. He uses stuff we're familiar with and pumps new meaning into it as necessary. Good. Yes?
Explain to me, it says when the sacrifice is burned, it's made.
Yes, it's a sweet aroma to the Lord. I have to say that God must have different olfactory nerves than I've got. Oh yeah, there would be incense there. But really what it's saying is, this is pleasing to God because I am accepting His symbol of the renewed, restored relationship. And so it's pleasing to Him. It smells good to Him because of what it symbolizes, because of what it is showing about my relationship and Him.
So the restoration of the relationship is more important.
Exactly. The restoration of the relationship is most important. All right?